So welcome to Thursdays with Procurement League. A lot of people are, in different places at this time. So we usually post this the next day for everyone to have access to our conversation. But our hope with Thursdays with Procurement League is to just give the contribution to the community of procurement people in whatever way we can by bringing in thought leaders from various industries. So just really, really, really glad to have you come and join us and do this with us. So I'll quickly introduce you to the best of my ability, but I'm gonna let you do a true job of introducing yourself.
Okay.
So I know that you spent 15 or so years in the space of procurement with Nokia. You've just risen up the ranks there, and now you run your own company, which does a lot of procurement consultancy, and it's a small company with a few people. And I'm going to let you kind of talk about what you do right now, and just how would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Okay. It's always a dreaded question. It's always been a dreaded question for me. That what you're at a party or you're meeting some new people, and they say, "What do you do?" And it's at times like those I wish I was a doctor or a lawyer or even a statistician. So because if you say I'm a procurement excellence consultant, it's kind of people don't know what that is. So I have to explain. And for years, when I was with Nokia, it used to be quite simple. I worked for Nokia, and I help the people within Nokia buy things more efficiently and get the best deal for their money and all the rest. So they go, "Oh, so you're in purchasing?" No, I'm not in purchasing. And I'm in procurement, but I don't buy anything. I got it down to a T, quite a way on into my career there. Say I focus on providing the best, most efficient environments in which good procurement can happen. So whether that's tools and processes, competencies, all the stuff that that enables the procurement world, I've been involved in some form or other. What I haven't actually done is been a sourcing manager or a procurement manager. I've never done. I've been involved in lots of teams that have done that. But at the end of the day, I'm not the one writing the contracts and actually, negotiating.
So you've kind of stayed away. You've stayed away from the grubby end of the business, then.
Yes, I've been quite successful in keeping away from having savings targets.
Nice work,
Yeah.
Andrew. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So tell me, why did you get into procurement to begin with, and how did you escape the grubby work?
Well, okay, this is an interesting story. So before my procurement career, I was a market analyst with a company called Frost & Sullivan. They were, at the time at least, competitors of the companies like IDC, Gartner, those sort of people. And my focus was on IT and telecoms markets. I'd written lots of off-the-shelf reports on software markets, hardware, ERP markets, mobile telephone markets, and so forth, and done a lot of bespoke work, for some pretty large clients who are looking to get into new markets. So I have a background in understanding the way markets work, what new entrants might need to do to get into a market, what sort of strategies might they employ if they're if they're moving into a new product market or a new geographic market or both. So I was doing some research on behalf of a client, which involved mobile security. And off I popped down to Farnborough, where Nokia was at the time, and interviewed someone about mobile security. And what Nokia were doing in that market, who they trusted, how they worked, all the sort of things that you need to find out about what's happening in the market to understand it. When I got back to my desk in London, I was in Victoria. There was a note on my desk saying that someone from Nokia had called. Could you call them back? And I thought, oh, I must have left something there. I must have left a briefcase or my laptop or something. I didn't, But so I phoned him back and said, I gather you were talking to a colleague of mine just now, and you were talking about, market research and so forth. And I said, yes, that's what I do. And she said, we're looking for someone to come in and talk to our procurement teams, our sourcing managers, about how to make the best decisions in buying and finding the suppliers that are going to be the runners and riders in the future. How to help them understand markets so they can make the best buying decisions. I said, well, that's up my street. I can do that. And so I went down again next week for a chat, and she said basically, well, we're looking for someone to do this full time. We want you to offer skills, extra services if they want to outsource to you to go and find out stuff. We want to have an online resource on the intranet. And so basically they want me to set up this sort of mini division within Nokia indirect services. It was that indirect procurement to supply this kind of information, these skills, and so forth. So that's what I spent the next 2 years doing. Running training programs on how to understand markets, how to use, if you want to use Porter's 5 forces, how to do that, how to, fairly and, with as much information as you can, look at a SWOT analysis and sort of analyze what that's telling you, how to ask the right questions when you're looking at the market in general, rather than looking for a specific product, because you're going to have all that information from your stakeholders, but you need to marry that with, okay, what's actually happening? Is there something that my stakeholders aren't aware of in the market that you can feed back to those stakeholders and say, well, you might want this, but this is happening in the marketplace. And rather than going for that staid old CRM product, as it was at the time, why not look at something that's cloud-based? Oh, Salesforce are making great strides there. Why don't you check them out at least? So that's the kind of thing, looking for some of the disruptors and learning how to spot when that's happening. So that's how I got into procurement, because when when Nokia happened and they lost all their market, I went over to Nokia Siemens Networks, the network side, and they didn't have the budget for someone who could provide those market services. They need people who could, actually get their hands dirty and work on the process. They didn't have any processes in place. The tools didn't gel, and so I was involved in, building the compliance around sourcing processes for Nokia Siemens Networks. So that's how I got involved in the process side.
It's almost like you got procured into the procurement business.
Yes, well, I quite grandly say, oh, I was headhunted, but it wasn't quite like that. It was just serendipity, I suppose. But yeah, it was an interesting way in.
Amazing. All right. So Andrew, that's a really good story of you just getting pulled into the field. What's your work in, I know you run your own consulting company now. What's your work in that? And what is it that you learned from Nokia and before that Frost and Sullivan that you bring into your consulting work? I just feel like our various experiences, what we learn from them, but what we don't learn from there is what shapes our own companies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah.
I find that what I'm doing now is kind of right in the middle of procurement and the early market research stuff. So I've been involved in a number of projects around risk and supplier risk management, how you understand how companies can sort of understand supplier risk management, how they use it, so that this was for a supplier risk management company, a supplier who wanted to really understand, gaps in that market and so forth. But more recently, I've been doing a lot of work in the EV space and transport in general, and looking at how electric vehicles and on a wider scale, mobility is being procured by certain, both private companies and by governments, and looking at the trends and what's happening in those markets, with a view to new suppliers getting in that want to offer things like payment services. So a new EV network, sort of a charging network, becomes available. How can what's the payment system behind that, and how does it work in terms of those transactions? And a lot of it is already done and dusted, but there's things happening all the time, new payment systems, trying to make it easier for fleet procurement to offer something that's not just a card to buy your fuel, but maybe you need to buy anything from a garage, or you want to get your car washed, or and you put it all on the same card, and you can't really do that with fuel cards. Some of them you can, some of them you can't. But can you use those fuel cards for charging at the EV station, even if that particular resource isn't provided by the card issuer? So there's lots of those little granular things like that I'm kind of teasing out that market to try and look at it's got kind of the procurement story behind that, so that the companies offering those kind of services or whatever can start to approach the market in a novel way with new ideas.
I love that. Martin, does anyone have any questions at this point about the EV market and anything from there before I move forward?
Yeah, I'm just fascinated by all that, Andrea, because I hadn't even thought about payment mechanisms that goes behind EV. That's just of course it needs to happen, but that's a huge amount of infrastructure that needs to support this new and growing technology, isn't it?
Absolutely. And like anything, EV won't really hit critical mass until there's the infrastructure behind that, and behind that needs to be a payment system. That it's not as easy as saying let's all buy EVs and that will solve the problem. Personally, I don't think it will. I think there are other things that need to happen as well. So I mean, and all of this happens because companies want to exploit the new markets, and they need to grow. So that's what. So I'm providing hopefully some value to my clients around what they need to do to get into those markets, who they need to partner with, or
what's the supplier maturity like in those markets then? Is it simply with regard to payment, is it simply you're porting over existing payment mechanisms and infrastructure into just a new user device effectively?
Yeah, well, it's not so much about because the payment infrastructure is fairly mature. You do get new entrants, and that market is constantly redefining itself. But under the underlying communications and the protocols for exchanging money and whatever, that's all kind of set. But if you're a card issuer, for instance, let's say that you are Total, and you've got service stations all over Europe, France, obviously, Africa, everywhere, and you want to be able to say to your customers, your business customers, your fleet customers. I'm all B2B, so I'm not really, I'm not talking about consumer cards here and Nectar cards, that sort of thing. I'm talking about kind of, if you've got a company fleet card, what can I offer my fleet customers on that card that will make their lives easier, and therefore get that company to go with Total's card instead of Shell's or whoever's. And so it's about kind of, well, a lot of these cards are kind of, I don't want to get too technical here, but they're closed loop, meaning you can only really use them for the intended purposes, which makes them different from, let's say, MasterCard or Visa, where they're a general card and you can use them for all sorts of things. So, and this is where like kind of those sort of companies might have an edge, but they don't really have that understanding of the fuel market. Likewise, Total doesn't really understand how it can broaden its offering to say, what if you're a salesman on the road and you've got, you break down at a service station, you're waiting for your breakdown service to come out, but you're getting hungry, so you pop into the shop and buy some food. If you did that all in a card, you'd make it easier for that salesperson. It's just easier for their life, and I think salespeople, that's one element. The other one is trucks and truck stops, and these guys are traveling all day, long distances. They'll need somewhere to stay at night. Sometimes they'll need lots of other services around just refueling the truck. And so how do you manage all that with your payment systems, your payment card? So I mean, it can get quite technical and quite involved. But when you start thinking about this in the EV terms, EV trucks are a bit of a way off. They will come, but they're a bit of a way off. But they're not going to reach anywhere near critical mass unless all of that infrastructure is there.
Yeah.
So this is a brave new world for whoever wants to try and get in.
No, it's really fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Andrew, like that's a really, I hadn't even thought about getting on this tangent, but that's a really interesting space that you're kind of like in, because it's so new and there's such a push towards, how do you go as green as possible?
So,
how are you managing the competition, the noise around, there's a big woke culture in the EV space. How do you manage that as you build the work here?
Okay, well, I avoid words like woke and culture wars and leave that to politicians chasing votes. Primarily, I'm thinking about the planet and the fact that if we don't do something, there's not going to be an economy around in 50 years to grow. So the issue is, I think you're asking around greenwashing and the idea that companies like Shell, for instance, I think they recently, was it a couple of days ago, they're sponsoring the cycle, the UK cycling team, and it's been called an act of greenwashing. And I kind of see where they're coming from, because what have Shell got to do with cycling? But anyway, so I try and keep away from that. And, you know, until I know otherwise, because Shell is one of those companies that I do track in terms of what they do for, you know, the EV area quite closely. And they, for all the noise around, you know, are they doing something for the right reasons, or are they really gonna, you know, are they really killing the planet? I try and get down to what they're actually doing, and I don't make judgments on whether they're good or bad, but you know, what are they actually doing to, you know, to further the market or get into the market? Are they resisting? Are there different parts of the company that are pushing and some are pulling? You know, it's never as straightforward as saying Shell, oh, they're a bad company because they, you know, they produce hydrocarbons, or Shell, they're a big company, are doing really well because they're getting involved in the, you know, Shell is one company made up of lots of different people, lots of different ideas, and they're, you know, they're pushing their areas one way, the other, sometimes in concert with each other and sometimes against. You know, so you can't really, you know, look at them as a whole entity. And it's the same with any big company. You know, the fights happen. It's probably the same as with the current government. The fights happen, someone wins, they move on. And, you know, all we can do, you know, as we're looking at this, is trying to, what I'm trying to do at least is give my clients a flavor of where that argument's going, you know, and are actually making any meaningful progress.
Yeah, no, I fully hear you. I mean, it's funny because my sister-in-law heads public policy for Shell, and my brother heads public policy for Coca-Cola. And I'm always pushing the bar. And I do completely green work, where I work to, you know, move kids on the spectrum into genius. And I'm always kind of, you know, poking them and telling them, look at what you do. And they keep reminding me that it is the impact that creates the economy, and let's move away from intentionality. And I think like that's kind of like just takes away half the anxiety of whatever we do.
It does. It's just very difficult to measure.
Yeah. Amazing. No, thank you for bringing that. I mean, I just think that's something we don't talk about a lot. So thank you. I love UK politics. So it's really like,
do you? Do you?
I love. I was following Rishi Sunak to make sure he wins, and too bad he didn't. But yeah,
I think there's a few of us were a bit disappointed with the outcome.
I'm not saying a word.
Yeah. So getting back to Nokia, I know that, I mean, it seems like you like hard markets. So Nokia must have been a really, really difficult market with immense competition, with all other telecom phone companies popping up and doing their thing. How did you survive 15 years in Nokia?
It is a tough environment. Yeah, it's a tough environment, both inside the company and outside, because you know, although it's pivoted while I was there from handsets to networks, you know, at the beginning there was many more network infrastructure technology suppliers than the market could bear. So we all knew that you know, that market was going to rationalize in quite a big way. We just hoped at the time that Nokia would be the one doing the acquiring, and so it turned out. Nokia acquired Motorola, Panasonic, Alcatel-Lucent in the end eventually, of course. So you know, so the competitive environment, it was quite challenging, but also internally, you know, that has that pressure, makes the working environment in those kind of companies quite tricky. In terms, because obviously, the company had to turn and change so many different times, and that reflects in its organizational structures. And that's the thing that I found most challenging, really. Not so much moving desks, it's more about, you build up relationships with people that you work with across different business units, and in procurement that happens more than probably any. I can't really say that happens more than in HR. I don't know. I've not worked in HR, but in procurement, you get involved with stakeholders from all over the business. I've been in deep conversations numerous times with the then CEO Rajiv Suri. I've been talking to customers in my last year or so. I was talking directly to customers and purchase, just buying deciders for, are you going to go with Nokia, or are you going to go with Huawei? Are you going to go with Ericsson? So procurement has that kind of reach that goes all the way across, from customer back to supplier and all the spaces in between. So when you build up that network internally, and you go, well, I know the guy that's we're talking obviously a big global company here. So, if I want to talk to the guy that we have in the Philippines that's working on our project for, I can't remember off the top of my head, one of the projects that we've got with people in the Philippines, and suddenly we move around and we're no longer kind of looking at things from that market perspective, but we're going to look at radio access networks, on a global, a more vertical way. Then I have to rearrange all those sort of relationships, and those guys are changing as well. So I did find that constant organizational change to be, although they were made for the right reasons, because you have to adapt. I did find those challenging, because it's not just about moving your desks or doing a slightly different job in a different way. So it's about personal relationships, and that's.
Yeah. So I'm just curious. This might be related to your work, might not be, but who would Nokia want to compete with, if at all? Or did they just want to remain who they are and acquire the companies that they were? Were you trying to compete with an Apple or anything else, or you just wanted to remain who you were?
Yes and no. So not Apple per se, because Nokia got out of the handset market. They're not involved in that. They've got Nokia phones, but they're created by another company called HMD, which is an offshoot of Nokia, but a different company. So it's really involved in network technology infrastructure. So the poles that and base stations that form a mobile network, or even when we acquired Alcatel-Lucent, fixed network as well. It didn't have fixed until it acquired Alcatel-Lucent. Alcatel-Lucent runs all the big, not all of them, but some of the big connectors between in continents. There's big pipes of that mean that the internet in India doesn't slow down when London wakes up. Yeah, maybe it still does. I don't know, but certainly there was a point where when in the UK, when the US woke up, or when New York woke up, our internet got quite slow. I mean, that was long ago, but those pipes, they were owned by Alcatel-Lucent, a lot of them. So, and that was new market for Nokia, because although it just acquired the company that did it and everything carried on, they need to have a strategy around how they go forward with that. Does it make any money? If not, does it divest? All those kind of things it needs to think about. What it did acquire with Alcatel-Lucent as well was Bell Labs. Because Alcatel-Lucent was part of Lucent, Lucent was one of the companies that was formed out of the breakup of the Bell companies in 1984, when the US's telecoms infrastructure was liberalized. So, and Bell Labs is really where all the magic happens, and where we probably, when I say we still, where Nokia still compete with companies that are, looking to innovate, and not just, is this ready for market in the next few months, but what's happening down the line. Not it's a kind of a grey area between the pure blue skies R&D, where they're just like, which you get in universities. This is a bit further downstream, where you've got some proven technologies and you want to try and make a market out of them. And procurement has got a great kind of role to play in that, because and this is what I found most interesting about doing my procurement role, is when we had Bell Labs, we also had a procurement process which was very risk averse, as you would probably find with lots of companies. We've got to make sure there's that there's no forced labor. We've got to make sure that they fulfill our business requirements, that they're not going to fall over financially, that they're not going to bring our company into disrepute. All those checks and everything. They've got to have a watertight contract where if they don't deliver, then we've got liquidated damages. Blah blah blah. We had all of that in place, which is no good if you're trying to get two guys in a garage with a piece of code that's going to do some wonderful things, and you want to get that to market quickly. You want to get that technology and those people working for you and creating some values as soon as possible. So and they wouldn't even know what to do with a PO. They just want to do their work. So how do we make a procurement process is agile enough to get those people working, not in 6 weeks or 6 months? Sometimes procurement process could take. How do we get them next week, but also make sure that they're not going to cause any harm to our business? However you measure that.
Yeah. I'll just ask a follow-up question here. How do you teach agility to organizations, to companies? Because we live in a very tumultuous, interesting space where everything's constantly shifting, everything's constantly moving. Sure. How do you build team agility and team thinking to get united in some way?
If I had a great answer to this question, I'd be Elon Musk's boss, I think. I don't know, is the short answer. I know with difficulty, and it involves cultural change, I think, and cultural change is, for me, one of the most difficult changes that you can possibly make within an organization, because you can rearrange the deck chairs, you can split off new business units here and there, but to try and instill that urgency, that has to come from the top, but be enabled through every part of the business, whether it's a hierarchical business or a flat organization, but however it's structured, it has to permeate across all those functions and be driven, guided from the top up, but driven from the bottom, top down, but driven from the bottom up in lots of ways. It's a very complex, very complex area. And if I had a good answer, then I'd bottle it and sell it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Okay, so I'll just shift gears. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
I couldn't have answered that question any better, actually, Andrew.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So I'll move on to the next part, which is I just I'd love to go back to your experience as Frost and Sullivan, and you
Yeah.
in kind of like I know it's a market research company. What were some things that, you know, this was a long time ago, but what are some big takeaways that you had from your time there?
Yes, and this is something that's that's reflected in what I was talking about earlier, and that is that when I started there, fresh out of grad school, I was you know, there were these big names that had been around for a long time. In my particular area, there were companies like Alta Vista and Compaq and loads of them. I'm trying to think of there was a big one but anyway, there were these big companies that have been around for a long time, and then PeopleSoft and Lawson and big companies that, you know, they've been around for a long time, and then the next day they weren't. So nothing stays the same. Everything changes, and that's what makes life, you know, in procurement, in technology, in lots of areas, it makes it very, very interesting. I think, what was the big company that was CRM? Was it Siebel? I think, was it Siebel or was that HR? Anyway, there were these, you know, these big giant corporations. Nortel was the one I was thinking. Nortel. They were you know, they'd been around for years, and the next day they weren't. They were, I think it's now Sienna, but it's you know, things change, and you know, companies that you know that you know think are here to stay forever might disappear tomorrow. So you know, and you know, you could think of it. I think of it in terms of, you know, how we look at markets in general as creative destruction. You get rid of all these companies because something new comes along. Salesforce comes along and just completely changes the, you know, the CRM market. Not only the CRM market, but how software is delivered. You know, so Microsoft used to there used to be like CDs on the front of computer magazines with lots of programs on. You know, and that just seems so archaic now. Why would you do that? It's and so my point is that, you know, these things change, and that change creates opportunities for new companies or those existing companies to change with them and find new markets, new products, and that's the interesting thing. That's why I wanted to work in that particular area, and why working for a company like Nokia was so interesting, because it was always trying to find not just new products, but new ways of working and developing and you know, getting things to market. And that whole innovation area is well, I did my degree in innovation and my master's degree in science, technology, policy. So it was all about, you know, how do we make way for the new? You know, what spaces are there? You know, and that's you know, that's the thing that keeps me driving. That's why I'm interested in EV and that whole infrastructure, because it's not just about EV, it's about that everything goes with it.
It's so interesting. So Andrew, you know, sometimes I feel like when you're studying the market, there are some companies who are very cautious of everything and take every step to be really calculated, and there are some that are just myopic, just keep doing their stuff, and sometimes those become the winners. You know, it's just a really confusing space. But what I am really curious about is, how does sales, and I know a big part of procurement and negotiation is sales. How do you think sales is transforming? What have you seen transform in the space of, you know, sales over the last 14, 15 years?
I'm not sure if I'm best placed to answer that, because like I say, I didn't get involved so much in procurement per se, but more in the environments. I do know, actually trying to sell myself and my services, which it doesn't come naturally at all to me. I'm not I'm not a salesperson, but I do know that, you know, the way I sell is just to try and create relationships, and then, you know, try to say, well, you know, I can add, what are your problems, you know, and find out what the problem is. I think, and I don't know if this is how sales has changed. I really don't know, because I'm not an expert. But I thought sales were just phoning up someone who might or might not want something and try to sell them. But it's not really. It's about, for me, creating relationships, finding out what you know, your potential customers' issues are, and if you have an answer for them, you know, good. And if you don't, then, you know, you've got a relationship out of it, at least. You know, you've got something out of it. You know, so yeah, it's more the long game. I think.
I hear you. It's a complex space. It's really difficult.
But the key thing, I think, is understanding what the problem is what are your potential clients' issues, and listening and trying to understand them. You know, that's it. And problem solving is one of the things I enjoy most about my job. Is, you know, solving those problems. If I don't have an answer, then I step away. It's not my area. But if I can offer any value in terms of, you know, answering that problem, then that's great.
Yeah. I hear you. It's interesting. Who knows what works and what doesn't, and what works with who? But
yeah, I think it depends what you're selling, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And it also depends how you're selling it. What is the impact of what you're trying to sell? It's a complex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as you say, measuring that impact is.
Yeah, totally. That's the most data crunching and understanding the impact can be as complex as things can get. I'll pause for a minute. Avneep, Martin, do you have any questions before we move on to the last two?
No, I was hoping that Andrew's going to give me some sales tips there for a minute, because I'm in a similar boat.
Oh, you and me both. No, I personally, I just get, I think I get lucky occasionally. Not enough, but.
But I think it is. I think relationships are absolutely fundamental. No matter what you read online, it's about building that connection with someone, isn't it? And you're not going to be able to win everybody over and get them to see the value, and if you can't demonstrate it, but when you can and build that connection and really listen to the potential customer, that's when there's that's where magic can happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, you know, I hesitate to say this, and they've got the budget.
They've got the budget.
Awesome. I love that. Okay, so I mean, honestly, I'm the complete opposite of you gentlemen here. I don't sell anything. In fact, I'm all right with people not even liking what I say or do in the space of autism and giftedness and education. So
that surprises me, Devangana, because I think you'd be a natural salesperson with your no personality.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not. Good for me to, stay true to that. So my last two important, and I think that kind of like will form the crux of this, because a lot of people who listen to our clips or to our video or go back to our YouTube page is people who don't know if they should shift careers or stay in. How much should you push in the same space? And I know Martin's here and Andrew's here and I'm here, and we've all been in the same fields for all of our lives. So what I'm curious about is, Andrew, why did you stay with a complex, market and company like Nokia for 14, 15 years? And to follow up with that, what is the sustainable procurement pledge? You could just kind of get into both of those questions.
Oh, okay, right, yes. I'll answer the first one. Is challenge. If you wake up every morning and you say, well, regardless of whether things are going well or not, if you've got a challenge ahead of you, you've got something really thorny to get your chops into, and you think, well, how am I gonna, for instance, one of the first things we had to do when we were Nokia Siemens Networks is work out how we could do goods receipt. Goods receipt is a really important compliance milestone for a big company who needs to maintain SOX compliance or internal audit. You've got to make sure you're registering and recognizing receipt of your goods in the right period. And it's a quite a mundane kind of technical kind of thing, but you've got to do it. How do you do it when your company is spread all over the world and you haven't got much in the way of software that unites everyone? How do you collate all that information and make sure that you can satisfy your auditors that you're doing your best to comply, even if you might slip up a few times? And those kind of challenges, the things that you get out of bed for. It was a constant stream of challenges like that. How do you and so there's those kind of professional kind of procurement kind of issues, and then there was also a lot of people have discovered working from home in the last 3 or 4 years. I've been working that way since 2010. So for me, that was a challenge to begin with. How do I maintain my relationships when I'm not in the office? How do I get over this presenteeism thing? How do I let people know that I'm actually working and I'm not watching Netflix or whatever? And the answer is really just get on the phone. You've got to work harder to keep those relationships going, and say, hey, look, I'm here. I'm not in an office, but I'm here. I'm working, and we need to solve this problem. So those kind of how you work problems, which I've probably got to solve a lot earlier than the majority of the world. It's still challenging even today because you still need to maintain those. You have to work harder, I think, to work at home to maintain those kind of relationships, and to ensure that that you're not being it's not being perceived and being seen to be doing your job. It's actually adding that value and showing that you're adding that value and demonstrating it. That's much tougher when you're not in the office all the time. So that's the first question. The second question is the sustainable procurement pledge. So that's a group that was set up by the CPO of Bayer. His name escapes me at the moment, but they said there's a group of procurement people that want to see procurement being at the forefront of the sustainability, which I think I'm 100% behind, because if we're going to do anything about sustainability as a planet, it's got to be driven from somewhere. And as procurement gets involved in almost everything that moves from one company to another, we're in the ideal space to be influencing the CFOs and the CEOs to think about, the not just the bottom line, but the triple bottom line, people, planet, and resources. How can we as procurement, try to what's the word I'm looking for? Nudge, try to encourage, big businesses to look for greener ways of doing things. And it's, lots of people, talk the walk. There's a lot of greenwashing, but procurement people are in a really strong position to actually make a difference here. So I'm fully behind it.
Amazing. Does Martin, Avneet, do you have any follow-up questions at this point?
No, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Okay, awesome.
Good.
So Andrew, talk a little bit more about like what is your active role in the sustainable procurement pledge? Like what would be something that you bring?
Okay, well, I mean, it's not really a role as such. I mean, when I'm looking at, okay, I mean, it's in terms of what it is I've pledged as a company, and I'm signed up to the Small Business Climate Hub as well, to one, be as green as possible in terms of my use of renewables, and from both a personal level and from a business level, but also in terms of the projects that I take up. So I'm keen to work on, understanding and try and, get companies involved in, EV charging infrastructure payments or whatever it happens to be, so it's actually sort of saying, how can I actively, expand the markets for better ways of doing things? How can I, and I'm also a keen follower of technologies that are going to help that maybe aren't, haven't been industrialized yet. So, for instance, there's a company that, or there's a number of companies that take fertilizer, and and this fertilizer, they expose it to CO2, and the offshoots of that is oxygen, and this enriched fertilizer, which they can use and feed cattle with, or fish with, or and it takes all the CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then converts it into animal feed and oxygen. And this is really promising stuff, but they're but industrializing that to scale it up, is that's a lot of work. So I keep my eye on that sort of thing, and in a procurement consultative sort of role, if someone came to me and said, "Look, we're looking at different ways of capturing carbon from our chimney stacks and using that in different ways," I would say, "Well, look, okay, here are the options that I'm aware of, and here are some companies that are doing that." So that's the sort of thing that if I was lucky enough to get a kind of contract like that, that's what I would be doing. So it's really, again, it's about new markets, it's about new technologies, and it's about trying to understand how they how they get to a point where they can be commercialized, and understanding those barriers to entry and how they can be overcome.
I love that you're in so many difficult mucks of soil. That's amazing. That's really interesting. Martin, anything to ask?
I just think that Andrew's at the cutting edge there of a number of different areas of business and life. So yeah, it's been really interesting to hear your story.
Thank you.
It's really interesting. Okay, so I mean, we've just got about 3 more minutes to this conversation. I would have loved to kind of talk a little bit more about the EV space and a little bit more about, how do you manage your professional life and your personal life, because I know you're doing some really exhausting work professionally. How do you bring that back home? But just in the interest of time, I'm going to stick to one last question, which is, if someone's newly getting into the space of procurement in 2022, or someone's looking to start their own procurement consulting, what would be some advice that you would give to them?
If we go back to that first one about procurement, new into procurement, if you'd asked me this at the first question, I could have spent a whole hour talking about this. I think procurement's moving on, and it's great to have procurement skills like negotiation skills, like understanding contracting and relationships, supplier relationships, all the rest. That's great, but I think that procurement needs to move on and become a more of a consultative kind of advisor to the board. It needs to bring itself up in terms of skilling its consultative kind of areas. They've got to be more like entrepreneurs, I think, these days, to sniff out the opportunities and become more than just we found this company we're going to deal with, please raise a PO for me, or do a contract with this company. It's got to get involved earlier, and that's always been the problem. Early involvement in the big decisions comes when procurement knows what it's talking about and can act as a real advisor to the business, as opposed to just a function that gets a deal done. So,
can I say something?
Yeah.
So I think what you've just described is spot on, in as much as procurement should become trusted advisors to the business. But linking back to your earlier statement about relationships maybe less important, I think on the contrary, I think relationships are even more important, so that you
right.
are able to operate on a
you're right,
absolutely
basis. Absolutely right. Yeah. I was trying to scrabble around for the building blocks of what procurement manager would have, and because supplier relationship management's always top of my head, all that comes in. But no, that's absolutely building relationships, building trust, and being entrepreneurial and sniffing out opportunities, so it brings it up from just being just a function that gets a PO from one place to another.
Exactly right.
Amazing. Okay, that's all from me. I loved your last point. I actually just made a note of that, because I think it makes a sense, not just for procurement, but for every other space that we're in. How do we kind of move towards more entrepreneurial ways of advising and looking outside in? Yeah, amazing. All right. Anything else, Avneep? Anything left that we should kind of get into? Okay, this was amazing. This was really educational for me, especially. I don't know about Martin, and Avneep, but I just
same for me.
Right?
Okay, thank you.
Like we learned a lot. So thank you so much, Andrew, for bringing your decades of experience to this conversation. It's just really interesting. So thank you so much. And
thank you for the opportunity.
We're going to stay in touch about the education side of things. I feel like I enjoy speaking to people who kind of have that lens of pushing the bar on things. So thank you so much. Amazing. Thank you, Martin, for joining us. Really appreciate
you.
My pleasure. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. Great chat. Thank you very much.